Think about this. Imagine you have a people, never before in history has there been a people dispersed 2,000 years all over the world. Jerusalem taken over by Rome, boom, occupied, dispersed, and it's like a barren wasteland. Tribes living there, Bedouins, Arabs. And what happens is, this is the biggest miracle probably of the last 150 years in terms of like big Red Sea moments. 2,000 years of uprooted people, and they're in Germany and Russia, and they're in England, and they're in South America. And they all are restored back to their land. And get this, they all speak the same language. 2,000 years of other languages, and they're all speaking Hebrew. And they're all practicing the same religious rites. And they're all one mind, and what they basically, God maintained a cohesiveness in the Jewish identity such that when they went back to their little sliver of land the size of New Jersey in the Middle East, they were able to reform their own cohesive language, culture, history, tradition, and religion, boom, virtually overnight, after being scattered thousands of years. It's a phenomenon. So now you have the nation regathered on real estate that nobody would help them with, and they weren't even allowed to have weapons. They couldn't defend themselves. Every Arab nation that surrounded them said they would wipe them out. And so David Ben-Gurion, who was the leader of the nation, they figured out how to get, they knew they were going to have, they knew the moment they declared independence, they were going to be in a battle for survival with 7 nations. It's like the story of Abraham with all these kings. So Mercedes, what they did was they asked for agricultural implements, and they asked for tractors and stuff like that, and they retrofitted everything they got into artillery. They had to do it in kibbutzes. They had no economy. So they lived literally in little religious communities that farmed and fed each other and took care of their own defense. They mobilized an army to withstand 7 nations without being able to have guns. That's the miracle of what happened when Israel beat their enemies without an army, without weapons. They figured out how to get a hold of them through Jewish businessmen in the United States that work with them. So America from the beginning has always been there to help Israel, Jews helping Jews. So the fact that Jerusalem exists up until 1967 now, 1948 they became a nation. In 1967 they recaptured Jerusalem, and they recaptured even the Temple Mount. But Moshe Dayan, if you don't know the story, he decided, it was probably a God thing, that he didn't go and take over the Muslim Temple Mount because he felt like he would leave that territory unoccupied. But he took over the rest of Jerusalem from the Gentiles. Remember, Arabs are Gentiles. So Jerusalem, Jesus predicted in 33 AD, was going to be trodden down by Gentiles. He's predicting the end of the nation of Israel before his death. He's basically saying, you guys are going to be like occupied by foreigners until the time of fulfillment, when the clock is hit the end of history as far as the Gentile era, and then history will roll back to Israel, the Middle East, and the Gentile nations are going to have to revolve around the history of what's happening in the Middle East. So here we are. What I'm trying to describe to you is Jesus saying the time clock was punched 1948. It began 1967. This prophecy, Luke 21:24, was fulfilled in our lifetime. And that means that we're watching the age when nations are going to rise and fall, and more you're going to see the Antichrist, Middle East, and foreign powers all revolving around events. So in a sense, history is already written. What isn't written is your role, the souls, and the sheep nations. That's what we're contending for, something which you hardly ever hear people talk about. But there are nations that are actually not going to roll over into the empire system. And Jesus said there will be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and on the earth. Check it out. Signs in the sun. So be looking for these solar blasts, the solar eclipses, their signs. And in the moon, interestingly enough, and that's why the blood moons are so significant, because the moons that show up, the blood moons that show up during these sacred feast days, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, when they show up, out of 365 days of the year, and they happen to line up, bam, on the 1, 2, or 3 critical holy days in Israel, which, by the way, the whole sacred calendar of Israel's observation of their schedule of sacred activity is lunar-based. It's not based on the sun. The sun is the messenger for the Gentile nations. The moon is the messenger for the church and for Israel. And the stars are the messengers for the children of God that are going to become redeemed, or they are the children of Abraham, or the stars basically are symbolic of the children that will become part of the family of God. So you've got the sun giving one kind of message, the moon giving another. I didn't realize until I listened to a guy named Troy Bruin today, something very interesting he said. He said that the sun is a masculine figure always in the Bible. It's referred to as a bridegroom going out of his chamber. It refers to as a man running a race. So the sun is always a masculine figure of the Godhead. The moon is the feminine aspect of the Godhead, referring to the church. It reflects the sun, and it has a 28-day lunar cycle, which is like a woman's cycle, 28 days. When you see in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, the great reference to the woman with the 12 stars on her head, the moon under her feet, the moon is always referencing Israel and the church. So it's a feminine symbol. That's why you want to look at the blood moon and ask, what just happened on May 14th? What was God saying? And then Jesus says there'll be distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, and men's hearts failing them for fear of the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. And why is it that these signs in the heavens are going to be speaking to us? Because the powers of the heavens will be shaken. What does that refer to? It refers to the spiritual forces that are in the heavens. Satan's cosmokroteros is what it would be called in the Greek. The layers of powers, principalities, and rulers of the darkness of this world. It's outlined in Ephesians by the Apostle Paul as an intelligent, well-ordered government of darkness that rules in this place we call second heaven, the atmosphere around the earth, and that God himself is shaking, disrupting, overturning, invading, and ultimately annihilating. And you're living in the time of tribulations, when you're living in the times that these thrones are under siege and God is returning to take control of planet Earth. And that's the collision of nations and systems. We see the shaking, but from heaven's perspective, it's an invasion back into Earth and God wrapping up the cosmic time clock. So these ideas are big ideas, but what they do is they provide a framework. And if you don't have the patience to develop a framework, then you can't see the picture. So the picture that I'm trying to present to you now is May 13th, May 14th, right this week, we just passed through a unique moment in history. We're at 11/11. Now we're going to some interesting numerology. At 11/11, the lunar eclipse was at its maximum force. The moon turns red because of the refraction of light off of the earth from the sun. And so Jesus talks about the sun, or the moon turning to blood, and that's why the blood moon becomes such an interesting subject line for these books you're hearing about, because it says in Joel that before the great and notable day of the Lord, the moon shall turn to blood. We're going to see the blood moon corresponding to seminal events that are taking place. And that blood moon is what we're going to come back in. I'm going to stop this broadcast here. Part one, really, for my purpose of this broadcast, is to give you China, Russia. I didn't even cover what's happening with the European Union, but that's been stalled. The Davos agenda is being frustrated. The globalist one world government plan they had using COVID and climate change and economic instability as a forced occasion for an economic global governance reset. Very real threat leading right into the empire beast system in its first form. It's been held off. And I see it all because I see it happening, because I'm going to show you in the next broadcast. The scales in the heavens, literally in the constellation of Libra, where the blood moon was fixated at 11:11. The 11th hour of history is upon us. The moment of decision for nations is going to shift. God is about to render a judgment of justice on behalf of the intercession of his saints, and God is going to begin to discomfit and disturb and overturn the powers of hell in their agenda over North America, because these other powers, as I'm looking in the last 30 days, God is almost sovereignly stalling them from their advantages so that they cannot overtake this country and destroy God's purposes and timing. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard so far. This is just a segment out of our entire podcast, but I'd love to give you access to the entire broadcast, and it's going to be at lancewallnau.com/podcast. Go there and you can sign up and get the entire unedited, uncensored message.
You know, everybody talks about being prepared. What happens when the bubble bursts? What happens when the dollar collapses? Are you ready? Are you prepared? Do you have emergency food kits? Do you have gold and silver? I want to talk to you about something you might not have heard of yet, and it's called hydroponic gardening. And it is one of the coolest things I have secretly fallen in love with over the last 8 to 9 months. I have an entire gardening system, and let me tell you what, it's enough food not to just feed my family, but to feed my neighbors. I have 36 different types of plants growing in this thing. I have lettuce, I have beans, I have strawberries. I have so many different things, and it's just one more tool in my arsenal to making sure that I'm ready to take care of my family and my friends and my neighbors if need be. And so I want to tell you about it. It's this really cool system. It's called Let Us Grow. And if you're interested in finding out more and finding out how you can have one of these, it grows vertically. It's a hydroponic garden. You might not even know what that means. It's an entire system where it's just water-based. There isn't a ton of dirt. You don't have to worry about bugs and pests or anything like that, because you can actually do this in your home, which means you can grow plants year round. It's so cool. I just did it through the entire fall and winter. And like I said, I have just had such abundance with it. So I want you to check it out. You can go to lancewallnau.com/garden and get all of the details on the Let Us Grow system. And be sure you stay tuned, because I just put one together for the office, and it took me less than 10 minutes to put the entire system together. And it just snaps together. You fill it up with water. You give the plants their nutrients. 30 minutes per week is all you're looking at for maintenance. So I'm telling you, go check it out. I'm going to have before and afters on the screen when I'm talking about this, so you can see the type of abundance I'm talking about. Be prepared. Go to lancewallnau.com/garden to find out more.